The Governing Well project, I think, is a really important reminder that the whole purpose of standards and the whole idea of committing to standards is that they matter. They affect what we do, how we do it, with whom we do it. And the Governing Well project is focusing on the role of governing boards in helping their organizations to embody, to live, to account for their performance around meeting the CHS, to really think about how governing bodies can help organizations really play out the commitments of the CHS in their daily workings. And in particular, focusing on staff well-being, treating staff fairly and equitably, and also being part and shaping and framing an organizational culture that really gives prominence to the ethics and the standards that the organization has committed to. So that's what the Governing Well project is ostensibly about. But you will hear more from Melissa and the team in a little while.
Thank you so much, Lola. Thank you to everyone who's come. We're about to do a very interactive set of 2 activities. The first activity is called Testing the Premise, where we're going to invite some people into the spotlight to test out some of the ideas we've come up with in the Governing Well project. And then we're going to do a hypothetical board scenario. And since so many of you here are board members, I'm really excited to see what you have to say about that. Before I go any further, I first wanted to acknowledge that today is the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia. And thank you to Rachel Jacot for reminding me of this. Rachel and Natalie Gons are on the call with us today, and they have been helping us on the Governing Well project. So do you want to wave to people, Rachel and Natalie? Yay, thank you so much. All right, so if you see our beautiful slide deck here, slide 4 is going to give you kind of a visual graphic of our approach, our methodology for the Governing Well project. What we tried to do is really explore this issue of what is governing well, what are the lessons that we've learned in the aid sector so far, and what could be some key questions, 5 questions that governing boards could be routinely asking themselves. What could be some good practices, and what could be some areas for investing more support into that area. And what we found through the literature were some key themes. We did a literature review, and then we started interviewing governing board members, including some of you who are on this call. Thank you for coming. And some experts, including some of you who are on this call, and some people who are practicing the area of governance. And then we wanted to test these ideas. So we went through an iterative process with an advisory circle, which we really appreciated. With the CHS Alliance board, we took a few moments of its time on one of the board meetings to engage there. And then today, our HNPW events, we wanted to use this interaction to further refine what we're coming up with that will be launched after the full analysis and synthesis in a report in the coming weeks. So what we wanted to do in the interviews is really get into the crux of what is the role of the governing board. How do governing boards consider the performance of the organization? How do governing boards consider culture? How do they look at risk? The issue of risk came up in our Leading Well report, where we had the traditional risk characteristics, risk categories, but then if you would go deeper into the how, you start seeing other risks emerging. And then what kind of support is needed to have a strengthened governance there? So what I'd like to do now is test an idea. I'm going to put on the spotlight 3 people. Suzanne, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me today. I've already learnt a lot from this meeting in terms of how you handle it. I'm an independent ethics consultant, and I suppose there are three areas in which I work. One is healthcare, which is a predominant area of my work. Another is in policing ethics, and I work with the London Met Police on that. And a third area is within the charitable sector, and I've been a chair of a number of different charities, although not in the humanitarian sector. And I found this project and the ideas that you've come up with really fascinating, and I thought that there were perhaps three that I might comment on, which I could come back to, but maybe just to kick off with a couple of reflections on the generality of what you said. When I read your account of accountability, the thing that really stood out for me was that you said not only accountability to donors. And I think that says so much about the sector and its funding. I was quite surprised to see not only in there, because my starting point would be that the priority accountability is to the people who benefit from your services. So I thought that was quite an interesting one. And I think the other general comment is that you emphasised in your introduction about cultures, plural. And if there's one thing that probably really gets me when I talk with people about organisations, there's the tendency to describe them as having an organisational culture. I don't think any organisation has a single organisational culture. There might be some sort of there might be some things which bind an organisation. But for those who are aware that I wrote a report on aspects of the organisational culture at Save the Children UK, one of the really important things to get across in that report was the complexity of the different cultures that somehow coalesced into a larger organisation and its culture. And I was just reflecting on, some really marked differences. My responsibility in that report was to look at the head office and its culture. What I know, although I didn't see, but I was told this by people who work there, is that the culture on deployment in the field is very, very different from the culture in the head office. And so I think, immediately when I started thinking about this issue in terms of boards, I think there's a tendency for boards, because they're closer to it, to think about the culture of the organisation in head office terms. It has to be thinking about those larger cultures. And then even within the sort of head office culture, I think you get different professional cultures. So I think the culture of fundraising, for example, is a bit different from the culture of those who are doing programme development, perhaps with a strong gender emphasis. So I think in order to sort of understand some of the, and they are sometimes ethical conflicts which emerge, you need to understand how those conflicts are within themselves, and then also how they conflict. I'll stop there, but I'd quite like to come back later to the specific. I wanted to comment on three of the specific items that you listed.
Thank you, Suzanne, so much. Lola, did you want to react to that? Build?
I don't want to react. I'd love to hear more from Suzanne, actually, and to get into a little bit more detail around the premise and the statements given there. Where I'm coming from is very different. So I'm coming from an operational background, having started work in nutrition and food security, and worked with organisations, primarily Save the Children, in fact, until 2005. And then since then, I've been working independently, partly on humanitarian policy, partly on partnerships, as I mentioned earlier. And one of the things that I've chaired another interagency initiative and been on the board of others. And one of the things that I find is really important is that whatever our role and whatever the organisation, we don't lose our own humanity as individuals, that we bring that to bear on what we do, how we do it, with whom we do it, in our day-to-day work. And what I'm learning is that sort of this divorcing of professional from personal is a complete nonsense. And unless we sort of recognize the need to bring our entirety to a challenge and our entirety to a situation, whether it's at the board or at meetings or interactions at field level. So I'm coming from that perspective, really. What helps us demonstrate our humanity in the way we work? And I think as chair of the CHS Alliance board, I'm hoping and wanting to try and bring that out more explicitly in the way that we work together, the way that we interact during meetings, the way that we correspond by email in between meetings, the way we challenge each other and challenge members of the team and try and probe about what's happening and why it's happening. And then the other thing I'd like to say as a starter is the fifth point in the premise, learning and improving, I see as an absolutely crucial element for all our work, not just governing bodies, but and not just organizations, but the system, how the humanitarian system operates and learns and evolves and possibly radically changes, actually, in how it's structured and what the incentives are. But that learning has to be honest, and it has to be real, and it has to be deep. And to unleash that learning requires a level of risk-taking and vulnerability making, so that you don't regard divulging mistakes or challenges or failures or difficulties as a negative, that they are as powerful learning opportunities, and possibly more so, as good examples of practice and work. So I'd really, really want to hone in on the learning and thereby improvement aspect of what we can do as governing boards. And now I'll shut up.
Can I add to this?
Please, who is speaking? Should I put you on the...
This is Naila.
Oh, yes, Naila, yes. Let me just put you on the spotlight. Go ahead and please introduce yourself.
I'm Naila Hussain. I'm a development consultant and worked mostly in NGOs, environment, and mostly projects in the field related to environment and development, women, and off late since a few years working also as an artist. Did this degree a little later. So doing both these things. I just wanted to add what was just mentioned, that a few organizations will have that generosity and magnanimity there to encourage people and to have that, and to sort of inculcate that confidence that it's so important to learn and to divulge mistakes, as was said. But usually I think I'm lucky with this organization that I'm also a board member and I've also worked there. I see that culture of friendship and a kind of a camaraderie which takes place whether one is having lunch or celebrating some religious festival or on daily basis. So many things happen. But in most organizations, that learning culture is to the extent it should be there. What was mentioned just now is not there. Usually, you're boxed in your own positions, and you're generally scared of seniors, and the board will also go along, and the involvement is missing. Sometimes board members are on more than one board, and so your attention and your focus keeps shifting, and obviously the objectives are different in different organizations. So this, I just wanted to basically reinforce, not to have that much of a difference of opinion, that how important this is, and very few organizations will consider it and not even know the importance of it. So like, for instance, in this organization, I don't know, I mean, of course, there is a risk taking and vulnerability that when another job is announced, people who are already there are also asked, because there is this thing of monotony and burnout if you've been already doing this job for such a long time. So you're also given a chance, and you're also in a way asked to learn something else which is closer to your heart, and you may be hired for another kind of a job. So these things are very important, and more often than not taken very seriously. They're not taken very seriously, generally speaking.
Thank you so much, Naila. But I wanted to also say how much I appreciated for the interviews that you spent time sitting with staff and hearing their perspectives. And I think that kind of human touch over a meal with people on the team, like Lola was saying, it kind of brings a richness of quality of your understanding of their experiences. I have a message here that Dr. Shakil has lost his connection, but they've exchanged notes. So I'd like to invite Fahim. Do you mind, can you turn your video on and come on? Yeah, let's see if you got your video. Okay, let me see if I can add a spotlight. Okay, yes, please. What would you like to add to this reflection? And sorry. First, could you introduce yourself? Yes.
Yeah, my name is Fahim. I'm working as head of programs at Foundation for Development, and one of, actually our chairman was supposed to be representing the organization, Dr. Shakil, who was in the spotlight but lost his connectivity. I'm sorry about that, and he just conveyed to me on the phone that kindly apologize. I'm trying to get connected, but as soon as I'm there, I can contribute. But on behalf of him, like since we were talking about it, so we have exchanged a few notes regarding these things that we are discussing. So I can contribute, and I tend to agree with Lola. She pointed some very good things. One of the things that we observe by working as we represent a national organization, a local organization, and working at the grassroots level, sometimes we have to face so many issues, especially the staff. Well-being is one of the primary things that we have to take into consideration. So this aspect of duty of care comes in, and fortunately we have developed such culture that we encourage the staff to have open communication, like from bottom up, like there is no hierarchies involved in communication. There is no communication gap. Anybody can, and we discussed this with Melissa as well previously, that in our organization, hierarchies are only responsibilities. They don't represent the authority, or we cannot like say that there would be somebody who could not approach the board member, or who cannot, or she cannot, he or she cannot approach the management. So this is one of the things that gives us this feedback, the effective feedback that we get quite frequently and regularly from the field. And these are the people who are actually our forefront, like they are the people who are performing at very very challenging situation. So this aspect of well-being of staff is a very important one, and we have to take this into consideration. I have a few of the suggestions, and this is for all of us, that while we are working in such environment, the psychosocial support, especially we have gone through this COVID situation where the traditional way of working or the conventional ways of working were not possible, like the community outreach was not possible in the manner that we used to do that. So it becomes very challenging, but on the other hand, then it becomes a bit of a challenge for to comply with all these restrictions, as well as provide humanitarian assistance effectively. And the donor comes in that, because since the organizations are mostly donor dependent organizations, especially the local organization, they have limited resources, although they have the capacities and they have the skills and they have the acceptance at the local level and the outreach, but still they are dependent on the donors. So the donor flexibility is one of the things that come up with us, because mostly the donors are restricted to or confined to their budgets, what they agreed with the national organizations or the local organizations. But then there is very little flexibility in terms of such situation. If there's something that we could not anticipate, it was all of a sudden that the things had happened, and it can happen anywhere. Again, God forbid it happens, but in humanitarian settings where the organizations are working, we cannot be sure of anything, irrespective of whether it is a disease or something else. So this well-being we have been taking, this came up with us because there was a certain fatigue within the staff because of such situation, because they had to work beyond their normal working hours in order to reach out to these communities and help these communities. And communities are our prime, they are the people who are what we are working for. So it becomes very challenging, but it goes both ways. For the staff, it is a challenging thing. For the communities who are in need, we need to get it and we need to assist them. So this is one of the things that we were trying to, and this is one of our learning as well, that we were trying to shift the staff from one place to another, trying to give them some breathing space and but since I'm talking about one of the challenges that we face is that the donors are not flexible enough in giving us the space in terms of the tight budgeting. There are tight budgeting, and then there is very little staff that cannot be substituted in Corona. We had 2 or 3 cases, positive cases. So we had to give them they were laid off from the job because of that situation. So this is a very challenging thing, but our culture is quite open. And this is, I'm talking on behalf of Shakil, since he's not here. So he might be in a better position to convey his own feelings as a board chairman, but this is what I feel and this is what we have discussed. So these are a few of the things, and there are more, and we can talk about later on as well. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Fahim. And you did it so beautifully at the kind of last minute, you swooped in. So thank you very much. So if we're testing our proposition, it sounds like what you're saying, definitely values is important. The organizational culture well-being is important. Absolutely learning and improvement is important. I guess the topic of power comes into play. And unfortunately, Alex Cole-Hamilton had to leave out a bit early today. She talks about power a lot, and it gets to the point, Suzanne, you were making at your beginning of your comments about having people affected by crisis at the heart of what we do, the center. But oftentimes the realities, as Fahim noticed, is the resources kind of take up a lot of our attention. Did you want to come back to that, Suzanne?
I think I had comments in particular on 3 of the items, if I can share that thinking with you. And some of it absolutely is to do with power and about embodying your values. Because one of the things I think is interesting is if one were to look at some humanitarian organizations, and this may no longer be true, but some boards, if you were to look at who was on the board, what you would say in terms of the embodiment of the values are that wealthy people rule the world. And I can completely understand why that happens, because people want to have those on their boards who can round up money from other wealthy donors and so on. But I think, if you're going to literally embody your values, I think there are some quite challenging questions for humanitarian organizations about who is on their board. How many boards either have people who are the people affected by crises or who have been affected by crisis as part of their leadership team. And I don't think it necessarily means that, if one looks at different sorts of governance models, it may be that your board are people who are experts in the field and people who can bring in money and so on, experts at running organizations. But there needs to be, at that level, really genuine ways of feeding in the views, voices, understandings, perspectives of the people that you serve. And so that might be You know, so, and I think that can be done in different ways. So the question is, as a board that is being truly attentive to the needs of the people you're serving, how do you then ensure that they are on feeding into your board in a way that's respectful of what they can give you? The other thing, I've come at this issue thinking as an ethicist and someone who has an interest in, you know, ethical leadership in organizations. So I wanted to pick up first this issue about values. Every organization I've ever worked with who thinks it's ethical will have values, and they will have values on posters on the walls. They'll have it in their literature. You know, there's values all over the place. I think that quite often what's not recognized is that ethically speaking, there are very few values which you could say are uncomplicated, and sometimes values come into conflict. And, you know, the only reason that you need to have leaders, in my view, is to tackle difficult problems. And, you know, if leadership was easy, then we wouldn't need it. You know, we would just all lead ourselves. So what is it we're asking boards to do? I think very often we're asking boards to deal with difficult questions like, what do you do when your values conflict? Either different values come into conflict, or you find that it's difficult to implement your values in the way that you would want to. So I wanted to take one example, for example, of openness and transparency. I'm a great supporter of openness and transparency. I think it's absolutely critical to accountability. And I think that the you know, humanitarian sector has made great strides in that sense over the years. But openness and transparency have limits. There are things that all organisations do, and indeed should, not be open and transparent about. You know, there are kind of obvious examples in terms of confidentiality in relation to staff and so on. But I think the key thing is if you're going to declare that you're an open and transparent organisation, probably the only way of squaring the circle is then to be really clear about what you're not going to be open and transparent about and why that is, and to be held accountable for your decisions about why it is that you're not going to be open and transparent about something. The other thing I just wanted to say, and this isn't to kind of pick an argument with Lola in any way, but it's just to kind of plant a question, which is about the whole person authenticity. I was recently asked to work with an organisation that has a tremendous problem with homophobia and racism. I mean, frank, overt, and very difficult. It's not a humanitarian organisation, I should add. They also had an equality and diversity approach, which welcomed people to bring their whole selves to work. And my view is that there are some aspects of people's selves that we do not want them to bring to work. We do not want them to bring their homophobia to work, their racism to work, their transphobia to work. So part, I think, of having clarity about your values as an organisation is also having an accountability for why you've embraced the values that you have, and why that then means that there are some aspects of people's whole selves that you do not want appearing in your workplace. And again, I think there's an issue of accountability there. So that was what I wanted to say about values. Shall I shut up and then move on to my other two top picks later?
Just in case Lola wants to reply on that last point.
No, I think that's really interesting about what you bring to the workplace. I would then want to know, what is it that brings that person with such conflicting personal values into a professional space that doesn't have room for that, doesn't want that, and is that too much of a divide to expect to be overcome in order to fulfill a job? I think that's really tricky. Do you have any wisdom on that, Suzanne, or others in the room? There was a lady who introduced herself as a consultant on ethics. Anna, is there anything you'd like to say on this?
All right, are you talking to me? I did my research on values, not ethics. So, or I don't know if there was another Anna. There was someone who had talked about ethics.
Well, anybody. who has a view on where there's a profound clash between personal values and organizational values? What do we do? How is that held? Should it be held?
I think personally that, you know, if you have very clear values in an organization, it could be also commitment for those coming in and to work, to say that if you work for this organization, these are the values that we are bound to. And if you do not feel that that is who you are and what you can stand for, maybe that is not the place for you to work. But at least it's very transparent, it's very open, and you would say, okay, actually these values, I feel comfortable here, and I could uphold them. So that could be already in a recruitment phase, be part and parcel of it, and even in the advert. So that could be one of the ways.
Thanks, Anne-Sophie.
And I'd say as an extension of that ultimately, oftentimes in the private sector and in other sectors, if they are values-driven organisations, then that is threaded through all their policies, their HR, how they recruit, and so forth. So people are attracted to organisations that are not necessarily aligned with their higher level personal values, but are going to help reach those. So if we can be clearer around the values and how they're lived in our organisations, then we attract the right people.
Lola, I was going to react, and maybe it links to what you were saying as well, Suzanne, which is we've got this idea of the culture and the values, and I think the humanitarian sector in and of itself is going through this conflict where its values have been based on, and maybe this resonate, or it struck me as you were saying, Suzanne, the different cultures of the deployment to the field, and we've had this, you know, to be very frank, the sort of male macho jump on a plane, get the logistics, get out to the field, get stuff done. Like, and there was a good value in that. We're recognizing that that model is not fit for purpose anymore. So it's a different skill set and a different level of values. And I think we're at that kind of that tension is playing out in the sector. I think it's played out to some degree already, and we recognize that there is this we're putting much more emphasis on organizational culture and values, but it's how do you keep that, how do you balance that? And it'd be interesting to see how that plays out for you, Suzanne, and because I do think those two cultures have kind of collided, and now we're trying to kind of step back and kind of pull it together as how we want it to go forward with that tensions that we've had in the past that can't hold.
May I come in on that? Just I'm sorry if I be a bit blunt about it. Values, like in our experience as an organization, like what I think that the culture and values are actually tied together. So over the years, the values evolved into something like concrete or something that we can say that these are our values, and we can probably say that over the years we have developed some values. These are universally accepted things. And then there is a diversity, of course, while you're working in different environments, very different ethnic groups and some things, and you have to comply with those things. But the reason why I was saying that I would be blunt, if there is a conflicting situation, and if there is something that the organization has developed a culture and where there are people who are feeling comfortable with that in compliance with those values which are universally accepted, I think they will go with the organization. Otherwise, they will just filter out of it.
Thank you so much, Fahim. Susan, you are on the advisory circle. You are on the governing board of CHS Alliance, and you have some interesting perspectives from your own organization. Did you want to build on this comment on values?
Thank you, Melissa. I think from experience and having worked with boards, there are two aspects. I mean, the two areas we're talking about, culture and value. I do find it's easier when you are a board member or in the governing body, so to speak, and you buy into the values, then you're able to sail through with the kind of culture that is ideal and expected or that is developed. I've seen a lot of board members struggling because of not buying into the values of the organization. And as I think is it Suzanne, one of the guests who said,
that nowadays we find ourselves with a board who are probably brought in for who they are in the society and not necessarily the buy-ins. But again, it goes back to the organization and how we constitute the boards. If we at any one point can compromise on our values, then the kind of culture that we're creating definitely will be questionable. So it's quite an issue when we are talking values, and as a board, while you're meant to oversee, you find that you are the ones who are not buying into the values. Being as a member of a governing body, I think we start from the values. There's a statement, one feeds on the other. I'm trying to bring my mind back. One feeds on the other. So we talk value in a humanitarian context. It also brings in the element of dignity to the people that you're serving. So you're not only in a governing board because you are playing an oversight role, but in a humanitarian context, it goes beyond you just oversighting. And that's why, if you relate with even the very initial question, why, how is quite important given such an environment and context. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Susan. Suzanne, you said you had two more points on our premise, one and two. Do you mind to just close us off then on this piece before we go into our
Can I say a little bit on values here?
Oh,
just
okay,
adding
Naila.
one line.
Naila, go ahead. Yes.
Just the fact that, you know, that there may be a challenge for the board or the organization hiring someone where there appears to be a clash. But then if there is, you know, I think one should give that individual a chance, that if there is enough strength in the organization and perhaps the person being hired who we are talking about has values which are not really, you know, which are in clash with this organization, but you know, depending on their past, where they've been, and maybe the values were not a problem there. So I feel people should be given a chance, because they may be able to, over time, and obviously there has to be some sort of a limit, that change their values if they fit the bill. Otherwise, that in the environment maybe is conducive enough to give them that kind of an atmosphere or that kind of a learning, that they perhaps can, with time, you know, have that ability to change. Because I just feel in this part of the world there are not that many opportunities, and if the things are going right, otherwise people, unless they are given a chance, you are preaching to the converted. You'll have the same kind of people coming in, and, you know, not much diversity, and you're saying the same thing over and over again. So I'm not saying that people with different or dangerous value system should be hired and should be encouraged, but maybe their values should change given the strength of the organization. Just that.
Brilliant, Naila. Thank you so much. And thank you to those who've been commenting in the chat. We're following closely Susan's point on understanding power as important. Marco differentiating, putting some nuance there. I just wanted to react quickly. We've seen in some organizations, there's actual space created for individual staff members, and I assume board members as well, to map out their personal values and the organization's values, and to already know if there's no overlap. Now, in some contexts, you don't have a luxury to choose. You have, like Naila's saying, there aren't that many opportunities. But if we know from the outset that our personal organizations, values and the individuals aren't overlapping, we can prevent a lot of pain down the road there. So I want to turn now to Susan to wrap us up. You had two more points on our premise.
Yeah, I hope you won't think this is an abuse of your chairing, Melissa, but I did just want to say one more thing about values, because there's a bit of me that's beginning to feel a bit uncomfortable, which is that something like 30 or 40 years ago, ethicists in the US, medical, healthcare ethicists, promoted 4 principles which they said were universal, and universal in the sense that they would apply to medical care to everyone around the world, wherever they were. It was a highly Western view of what medical ethics should be. And I would hate to see humanitarian organizations fall into the trap of thinking that the values which absolutely make sense to those working from a kind of Eurocentric perspective are the ones which should bind organizations which are operating around the world in different contexts. I'm not working within the humanitarian sector, so I can only guess at some of the value conflicts that you will have as humanitarian organizations serving populations which have a very different set of values from the ones which might be being propagated from the center. And just in order to be a bit critical of what the consequences might be, looking at it from a Western perspective, but where would humanitarian organizations be if they adopted the position that looks like it may emerge in the US, which is that abortion and some of the associated gynecological and reproductive care which goes with that is and will not be permitted. So I think there are some real challenges to thinking about what values are appropriate. But I'm just going to very quickly go on to the other 2 things that I wanted to say. And one is about the giving priority to staff. I don't have a problem about this, but what I have seen happen in healthcare organizations with the rise of the patient safety movement is that you have boards and executives making very grand statements. Safety is our #1 priority. And it can't be. It's one of many priorities that you have. You want care to be safe, but you want people to receive timely care. You also want people to receive compassionate care. And sometimes these things come into conflict. So I think that basic principle is a good one, but it really needs to be broken down and kind of examined for where staff wellbeing fits alongside all of your other priorities. One of the most difficult things I ever tried to do was to merge a charity. And what that taught me was that the staff who work in a charity see it as belonging to them. They are the guardians of that charity's mission. If you then try to change that mission or to merge a charity or to alter direction, it becomes extremely challenging and very distressing for staff. And so, there are questions about how you then work your way through a situation where staff wellbeing probably isn't your #1 priority, because you want to give your #1 priority to achieving the organization's mission. So I think that needs to be balanced. And then the very final thing I wanted to say about learning and improvement, and it comes back to, I think, the importance of learning from people who have experienced humanitarian crisis. I think there are 2 reasons for saying we really need to learn from the people who are receiving services. One is a basic principle of respect. From an ethical point of view, it's about respecting them as your equal. And that is so hard for service organizations to do, is to really respect the people that you're serving as being absolutely your equals. But so it's ethically imperative for that reason, but it's also ethically imperative because of the consequences. Again, I can't speak about the humanitarian world, but if you look at what quality improvement in healthcare, there is one thing which we can say really makes a difference to quality improvement. And that one thing is truly engaging the people who are going to be the recipients of your service, and hopefully doing it as a co-produced piece of work. So I think when it comes to learning and improvement, the absolutely critical thing you want to learn from is to learn from the experiences of the people that you are serving.
Wow, and with that beautiful ending, which really reaffirms the importance of the core humanitarian standard, which puts affected people at the heart of what we do. Thank you so much to Suzanne, to Lola, to Fahim. I'm going to take us off on the spotlight, and we're going to do a fun activity to round out the time. What we're going to do now is we're going to have a hypothetical situation of a hypothetical board. This board is a composite. It's a composite of different boards that we have studied. And by the way, when we studied the boards who have come out through public scrutiny, we were looking at boards who were having to deal with examples of sexual exploitation, sexual abuse, sexual harassment, also structural racism, and also you mentioned, Suzanne, merging organizations, the pain, the stress that goes along with restructuring has resulted in serious consequences, including one organization had some high visibility suicides. So we do want to see what can we learn. And so we've created a composite organization. If you go to the slide deck, I think you should all have the copy of the slide deck. We have the fictional scenario on slide 7. This is a, thank you, Andrew, a fictional organizational board. And this board, in general, they meet quarterly. With COVID, it's not been as regular. They haven't seen each other face-to-face in years. They have Zoom calls packed with agenda items. They have different board members care about different topics of the agenda. They are part of a federation. So there's sometimes questions, well, if we do it this way, does our sister agency do it the same? And we're all doing this, all the board members are doing this job as a volunteer. They have a normal day job. If you go to slide 8, our fictional scenario, we were hit very hard by COVID. Our budgets have been squeezed, our staff are getting cut. Remaining staff have been asked to pick up the tasks of those who've been let go. And unbeknownst to the board, there have been increasing incidents of bullying, of sexual misconduct, and of burnout. And this has negatively impacted the staff, the volunteers, the consultants, and the people that the organization serves. And this information is not necessarily coming through in the board's reports from the senior management team, but there are some small signs popping up. So what we like to invite you to do is pick a group. We have slide 9. What questions should this board be asking of its senior management team? Slide 10, what habits or practices should this board be developing? These are kind of behaviors. And number 3, group 3, what support should the governing boards be offering to the organization? Or maybe they need some help themselves because they're in over their heads. So I'm going to have these breakout rooms. If you go ahead and choose a breakout room, you can choose which one you want to go into. Welcome back. You know, it's a good conversation when no one hits the leave the meeting button immediately. So I apologize that I had to violently pull people out. One of our values is respect and respect for your time. So we want to use our last 10 minutes to close. So what we're going to do now is we're going to see if anyone has anything burning that they really want to bring back from the conversations, and we'll see if these kind of align with what we're seeing in the research. It's the kind of bonus slide at the end, and then we'll turn over to Tanya to close us out. So we talked in groups about what questions boards should be asking, what behaviors or habits or practices they should be developing, and what kind of support they need to provide to the organization or they might need themselves. Does anyone want to just react to that? Anything come out of that conversation that's important to bring out here? I really liked the first group on questions. There was some almost like proxy indicators, which we were seeing in several organizations. If you start asking, what is the status of complaints? It can give you some interesting insight. If there's no complaints, that's not normal.
That's not normal at all.
No, if no one is complaining, that doesn't mean everything is great. So one of the people we interviewed, Virginie from Amel, she said she's trying to sensitize. It's good to have complaints. And at the same time, she and others can understand why you might feel a bit nervous. The question about turnover, are staff going through very quickly? Are staff going on medical leave? Are they burning out? This can also be an interesting question. Petros, Florida Petros from World Vision, he said, you need to have your nose in and your fingers out. And Steve Dennis said, your nose in and your fingers out. So you shouldn't be meddling. But then if something, as Steve Dennis says, doesn't pass the smell test, shouldn't be afraid to ask more questions there. If you go to slide 13, we were kind of zooming in on these 5 questions. Number 1, why are we here as a board? We need to have clarity of purpose, of mission, of vision, but also the values. And you'll see from our conversation on values, so much comes up. It's not clear cut and the obvious. To have space to talk about that is really important, and to widen the oversight lens to not just, here's your finances, here's your strategy, but taking a much more profound understanding of how the organization operates. Number 2, who are we? This gets to Suzanne's point. We're not just a bunch of wealthy people. Usually, if we want to have some kind of oversight, we need to have some experience. We need to be informed about what the people we're serving are experiencing. So you'll hear in an Embodying Change podcast interview launched at the end of this week, Asim Prakash and Tosca van Vijvergen talk a lot about how to get that. Either you go, you get out of the boardroom and go, and you could also really look at the information we're getting through the CHS verification scheme, what organizations like Ground Truth Solution and Loop are finding. 3, how are we behaving? This is modeling behaviors. Can we welcome feedback? Can we normalize dissent? Can we, Kenneth Kim from Canadian Food Grains Bank and World Renew said, if it's really helpful, because some people want to be friends, they don't want to have an argument, they don't want to raise an issue. It's helpful if you ritualize debate. So it's just become normal to have, okay, let's take both sides of the issue and let's debate it. To demonstrate that you do prioritize and do care about certain things like safety, like staff well-being, and exiting after a term limit. This came up in the research as well, because there's something called the confirmation or affirmation bias. If you come very, very, very close, it might hinder you from moving forward on some difficult decisions. Number 4, what are we doing as a board? Are we using our power responsibly? Are we just kind of taking all the information at face value? Or are we continually asking questions if something doesn't feel right? Do consequences come when necessary? And are those meted out fairly? In some of the investigations we found, people didn't get the same consequences depending on their level of status in the organization. Number 5, how are we learning and improving? We don't know everything. Mistakes are going to happen, but let's anticipate the mistakes. What happens if we get a whistleblower report? Do we know our policy? Do we know what to do? What happens if we get a complaint? What happens if we start to hear of some of these things that we found? Can we do a scenario? Can we practice? CHS verification is a valuable, very valuable tool to learn and improve and monitor improvement over time. So are we taking advantage of that? These are the 5 things we've come up with, but it's still a work in progress. So we're going to take a double look at this conversation we've had today and your slides. We really appreciate. All right, so with that, I want to turn to Tanya to close us out.
Thanks so much, Melissa. Thank you, everyone. It was really nice to meet the people on the screen and connect with you. It's a really rich discussion. The groups that Melissa has pulled together for this Governing Well, every time we come together, it is such a enriching conversation, because it really gets to these kind of core issues of ethics and values and kind of our rights, and what are we trying to change and how can we change it and what's the right modality for it. So really, really rich conversation. And I think what we keep coming down to is as well this, while it is a rich conversation that encompasses so much, we keep kind of boiling it back down to kind of this piece which has come out really strongly in the conversation today around kind of being accountable for what we say we do. And governing boards have a huge potential in that. to be able to, in this last exercise we did, what do they need to be systematizing? What do they need to be regularly asking for? What do they ask for so it's not just flagged as when it comes to a crisis point? So I'm really hoping out of this we can get to that point. We've all normalize the idea of treasurers on boards and doing financial reports regularly. We haven't normalized in the same way how we're paying attention to the people and the culture and how complaints are handled, and that's a bit of this mission to do it. And I know the report will be really good when it comes out to help us get that flavor and see how, as the Alliance, we can progress this, link it through, use the CHS as one global tool that puts people, like you said, Suzanne, at the center. That's what we want to do. And how do we hold ourselves accountable to that? So, respectful of time, massive thank you, Melissa, and the support you've had. Thank you, Rachel and Natalie, for great to see those quotes. Really excited now to see the report. Thank you for guiding us through, keeping us as active through this. And then a huge thank you to Lola, Susan, and Hannah from our own CHS Alliance Governing Board. I think it is so valuable that you are taking this on, working this journey with us, and thinking about what it means for the Alliance Board, as well as your leadership to this, Lola. So huge thank you. Do stay in touch, do sign up. I don't know whether Rosa's online or someone can put up the newsletter link if you're not already signed up, because we'll be progressing this discussion on organisational culture. We've got a humanitarian accountability report being launched in June, big focus on organisational culture. Within that, there'll be the report itself of governing well, and also will be discussed at our humanitarian HR conference in June. But also there's a possibility for you all to sign up for the CHS Exchange in September, where we also want to progress this discussion as well with a broader audience. So lots more conversation to have, so do stay with us. It was really, I've got a lot of takeaways and thoughts from it. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, wherever you are, and really great to meet you all.